tonight when the sun goes down, you're going to flip a switch. Light will flood the room. You won't think twice about it. You'll keep scrolling, keep cooking, keep existing exactly as you did an hour before, as if the sun setting changed nothing at all. But for 99.9% of human history, that switch didn't exist. When the sun went down, the world actually ended, not literally, but functionally, completely, every single night. What did your ancestors do instead? The answer is far stranger than they went to sleep. They didn't sleep the way you sleep. They didn't experience darkness the way you experience darkness. And the thing they built in those dark hours around a small dying fire might be the reason you're capable of love, gossip, and storytelling at all. Start with the obvious problem. No artificial light means no work. You can't hunt in pitch black. You can't forage. You can't make tools with any real precision. So for several hours every single night, every human on Earth was forced into the same activity, sitting still in the dark, near other people with absolutely nothing to do but talk. This sounds like boredom. It wasn't. It was the most important classroom in human history. Anthropologist Polly Wiessner spent decades living among the Jew/Hwansi people of the Kalahari Desert, one of the last populations to retain a largely pre-industrial nighttime culture. She recorded what people actually talked about during the day versus during the night, and the difference floored her. Daytime talk was practical. Complaints, gossip, logistics, who owes who a goat. Nighttime talk was almost entirely different. It was stories, myths, histories of the dead, cautionary tales about the spirit world, jokes that revealed how people should treat each other. Daylight built the schedule. Darkness built the culture. Here's the part that should bother you a little. Wiessner found that firelit storytelling activated something daylight conversation never could. It triggered what researchers call theory of mind at scale, the ability to imagine many other people's perspectives at once, tracking who did what to whom across a story with a dozen characters. Daytime gossip is theory of mind for one or two people. A myth told around a fire at night is theory of mind for an entire tribe, an entire ancestral lineage, sometimes the entire cosmos. You weren't built to think about one other person. You were built in the dark to think about everyone. Think about what that actually demands of a brain. To follow a myth with a dozen characters, you have to hold each character's motives in your head at once. You have to remember who lied to whom 3 generations ago in the story. You have to track loyalty, betrayal, debt, and consequence across a timeline that might span a person's entire life. That's not a small mental task. That's one of the heaviest cognitive loads a human brain performs, and your ancestors trained it nightly for free as entertainment. Wiessner also noticed something about who got to speak. During the day, conversation was loud, overlapping, transactional. At night, the same people who'd been arguing over food an hour earlier would go quiet and let one elder speak uninterrupted for 20 minutes. Status flattened. Authority shifted from the strongest hunter to the best storyteller. For a few hours each night, the social hierarchy of the entire group reorganized itself around a completely different skill. You still do a faint version of this. Notice who gets quiet, who leans in. The moment someone says, "Okay, this is a crazy story," for a few seconds, status doesn't matter. Only the story does. But it wasn't just talk. It was a specific kind of talk. And it had rules nobody wrote down. No interrupting the storyteller. No correcting facts mid-story. Even ones everyone secretly knew were exaggerated. Children were allowed to ask questions, but not to mock. The fire itself acted like a kind of social referee, a thing everyone faced together instead of facing each other directly, which somehow made hard truths easier to say. Why does facing a fire make truth easier to speak? Psychologist Christopher Lynn has studied this almost literally. He found that watching flickering firelight produces measurable drops in heart rate and blood pressure, a state he calls a relaxed but focused mode of attention. Your ancestors weren't just gathered near warmth. They were biochemically primed every single night into the exact mental state required for empathy and patience. Modern therapy rooms try to recreate this with soft lighting and slow breathing exercises. Your ancestors got it for free for hours automatically, just by living before electricity. Lynn's research goes further than just the body. He argues that this firelit state, relaxed but still alert, is precisely the window in which humans are most receptive to new information without feeling threatened by it. You're calm enough to listen, awake enough to remember. It's the exact opposite of the state you're usually in when you receive most information today. Upright, scrolling, half distracted, slightly tense. Your ancestors absorbed their entire cultural inheritance, every rule, every warning, every piece of moral instruction, while their nervous systems were in the one state best designed for absorbing it. Now compare that to your evenings. You also sit in low light at night. You also stare at a glowing source. But instead of one slow fire shared by 20 people who must take turns speaking, you stare at a screen that refreshes every few seconds and demands nothing from you but your eyes. The flicker is similar. The chemistry might even be similar. But the social architecture is gone. There's no turn-taking. There's no shared myth being built in real time. There's just you alone, lit by a fire that tells you 1,000 fragmented half-stories instead of one whole one. That's not a coincidence. That's a void. There's also the question of sleep itself, and this is where it gets genuinely strange. Historian A. Roger Ekirch dug through centuries of diaries, court records, and medical texts from pre-industrial Europe and found repeated references to something almost nobody alive today has ever experienced on purpose: segmented sleep. People didn't sleep in one continuous block. They slept for a few hours, woke naturally in the middle of the night for 1 or 2 hours, and used that time. They prayed. They had sex. They visited neighbors. They simply lay awake in the dark, thinking. You call that insomnia. They called it normal. Ekirch found explicit phrases for it in old records, terms for first sleep and second sleep, used as casually as you'd say before lunch or after work. It wasn't a disorder. It was the default architecture of the human night, broken into 2 acts with a quiet, conscious intermission in between. He traced these references across hundreds of sources: court depositions where witnesses described waking neighbors during their first sleep, medical manuals advising physicians on which treatments worked best if given to a patient after first sleep, before second. Even religious texts assumed it, recommending certain prayers be said specifically during that middle waking hour, as if the entire culture had quietly agreed on what the dark hours were structured around. This wasn't a fringe practice in one village. It shows up across centuries and across an entire continent, suggesting it wasn't a habit people chose so much as a rhythm their biology defaulted to once artificial light was taken out of the equation. What happened to that intermission? It mostly vanished with artificial light. Once you can extend the evening indefinitely, the biological pressure to split the night disappears, and the single unbroken 8-hour block becomes the new normal, then the expected normal, then the only correct way to sleep, as if it had always been that way. It hadn't. For most of human history, the dark hours weren't one sleep. They were 2 sleeps with a window of consciousness in between. A strange private hour that modern life simply deleted. So what filled that gap? If not scrolling, if not screens? Sometimes nothing. Just lying there in real darkness, thinking. No information, no stimulation, no fire even sometimes if it had burned down. Just you, your thoughts, and the people breathing near you. Researchers who study attention restoration argue this kind of unstimulated darkness may have been doing real cognitive work. Without anything to look at, your brain defaults to its own internal narrative engine, the same network responsible for memory consolidation, emotional processing, and creative problem solving. Some sleep researchers now suspect that segmented sleep's middle hour function as a kind of nightly therapy session nobody scheduled and nobody paid for. You lost that hour. You gained 12 more hours of usable light. It might not have been a fair trade. Consider what you actually do with the extra hours artificial light handed you. Some of it is genuinely valuable work, connection, safety, but a large share of it gets absorbed by exactly the kind of low grade, half attentive stimulation that never quite satisfies. You stay up later not because you're doing something essential, but because the room is lit and the option is there. And stopping feels strangely harder than continuing. Your ancestors didn't have that option. The fire eventually died down, the light eventually ran out, and the choice to stop was made for them by physics, not willpower. Put it all together in a strange picture forms. Before electricity, night was an empty time. It was the only time built entirely around presence, around shared story, around faces lit by the same small flame, slowed heart rates, turn-taking myth, and an unhurried, segmented kind of rest that left room for the mind to simply exist without input. None of that required intelligence you don't have. It required darkness you don't have anymore. This is also why so much of what feels deeply, almost spiritually comforting to humans still echoes that structure. Campfires, candlelit dinners, bedtime stories read aloud to children, even now, even though the children could just read the book themselves. Sleepovers where the real point was never the sleeping. You are reaching, without knowing it, for the architecture of a night that artificial light quietly dismantled. Notice how often the things people describe as their best, most memorable nights still follow the old pattern almost exactly. Low light, a small group, one person talking while everyone else listens, no screens, the conversation drifting somewhere it wouldn't go in daylight. You don't plan for this. You just recognize it when it happens. The way you'd recognize a song you didn't know you remembered. Your ancestors didn't have entertainment after dark. They had each other, and that turned out to be the same thing. Tonight, when the sun goes down, you'll flip a switch. But somewhere underneath that easy automatic motion is a body still wired for fire, for shared stories, for a sleep with a window of consciousness built right into the middle of it. You can't get that night back exactly as it was, but you can borrow pieces of it. Turn one light off instead of all of them on. Tell a story out loud instead of typing one. Sit in the dark with someone, facing the same point of light, and let the silence between sentences last a little longer than feels comfortable. That's not nostalgia. That's just remembering what darkness used to be for